Hello and welcome back to the Project Return online classroom. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about reading and rap and B.F. Skinner. And so, my name is Elizabeth Keel and I'm the Program Manager at Project Return, a nonprofit based in Tampa, Florida that serves adults in recovery from mental illness. And what we do at our center is we have a multitude of educational opportunities that our members can take up on, including a very creative and booming art culture that's really exciting with a bunch of fun outsider art, as well as poetry class with me and current events and all kinds of other things, including reading and rap. And so, as you know, we can't read our reading and rap book, so instead we're going to be discussing from Freud to Frankl personality theories. So today we'll be talking about B.F. Skinner. So who is B.F. Skinner? Well, he is a theorist who came up with the idea of operant conditioning. And so operant conditioning is when an organism operates on their environment. And during this operation on the environment, we all encounter a stimulus. So let's think of an example for this. I am hungry, so I go into the fridge to get something to eat. And every time I go into the fridge, there's something there. So anytime I'm hungry, I know I can go to the fridge, I can get something to eat. And so the behavior is often followed by a consequence that modifies how often that behavior is going to get repeated in the future. So let's use the same example. Let's say I'm hungry, and not just hungry for anything, I'm hungry for sweets. So I go to my cupboard and I look inside to see if I have any cookies, which I don't. And when I encounter the cookies, I enjoy the cookies, I eat the cookies, and the consequence obviously is that it's bad for my health to eat a bunch of cookies. But the modified behavior is that every time I go to the cabinet, I know that the food is going to be there, and so I have the reward of the food. So anytime I feel hungry, I can go and get that. So that's operant conditioning. So let's give you an example of an animal model of study where B.F. Skinner used rats in a cage to determine how operant conditioning works. So the first example, a rat in a cage. So first off, rats that are in a cage, they're curious, they're very intelligent, so they run around, they look at things, and let's say there's a lever or a button, and every time the button is pressed, a pellet of food is dispersed. So the rat starts around and starts running around and gets super excited and just so happens to accidentally step on that button, and pow, there comes a pellet. Reward. So the rat operates on his environment, on the button, presses the button, and then during that he encounters the stimulus, the reward, that enforces the behavior, enforces the button pressing. So the reinforcer, the food, the pellet that's given, increases the behavior that the rat produces. So let's see, what else? So what do you think if the rat pressed the button and a pellet did not emerge? So if the rat has already learned that when he operates on the environment, when he presses the button, that he'll have a reinforcer be produced, a positive reinforcer, and then at that point, the rat has learned how to press the button and get the food, and then suddenly, when he presses the button, the food doesn't appear. So what happens? Eventually, he learns that pressing the button no longer produces the rewarding properties, the reward of the pellet, and therefore we have what's called an extinction of behavior. He no longer presses the button with the expectation that he's going to get a pellet. And so that's the two parts of operant conditioning. One, when the organism operates on the environment, and two, extinction of behavior. So let's think about another thing that B.F. Skinner talked about, and that there are 4 different ways of reinforcing something. Well, not just reinforcing something, but scheduling reinforcement. And what do I mean by that? So, in the first example that I gave, the rat is continuously being able to press the lever and get the pellet. So that schedule is continuous. So he's always able to get the pellet. And then the next stage is when we have a fixed ratio, right? So a fixed ratio is where every time he presses the pellet in a certain ratio of presses, he will get the pellet. So every 3 times he presses the button, he'll get a pellet instead of every time he presses the button. And so then the next one is fixed interval. And so fixed interval is where it's timed. Timed every certain period of time, like 20 seconds. Every 20 seconds, if the rat operates on the environment and presses the button within that 20 seconds, he'll receive a pellet. But if he presses the button multiple times in that 20 seconds, he'll only receive the pellet once. And so the last one is variable schedules. And what does that mean? That's the schedule of reinforcement where the first time you press the button, you get a pellet. And maybe you press the button 6 more times and then you get another pellet. And then you press it 3 times and you get a pellet. And so it varies how often the schedule is of producing the reinforcer, the positive reinforcer. And so B.F. Skinner thinks of this as the mechanism of gambling. We always think about, if we don't play this next hand, it could be the winner, it could be the one. And so he always understood that this schedule of reinforcement had a huge impact in understanding the way gambling influenced the way we think, feel, and behave, the way our brain processes that experience. And so let's give another example. I love this example because it's a personal example. So when I first started with my black lab and trying to train her, I was a mess. She is totally unruly. She is nutso to the extreme. I used to call her Mozilla, or not Melzilla, because she was literally like Godzilla. She would jump on everybody all the time. So I needed to determine a way to change the way my dog operated on the environment, change her behavior. And so what did I do? I started by introducing a reinforcer. And so what is a reinforcer? It's any kind of positive stimulus. In our example that we already gave, the reinforcer was the food pellet. In this example, I'm also going to be using food. So what I did is I took out the measurement of what my dog was going to eat, which is usually about 1.5 cups in the morning. I would take the 1.5 cups and I would sit down with her, and every time she would sit, I would say yes and give her a treat. And eventually, every time she would then stand up, I would say yes and give her a treat. Every time she would sit, I would say yes and give her another treat. And so she quickly learned that the reinforcer was getting the treat. And so at that point, I started to shape her behavior. So let's give this example. Now I want to teach Melfina, that's her name. I want to teach Melfina how to pick up the paper outside. Well, first, she doesn't know how to pick up the paper. So I start by shaping the behavior. And this is an important thing, shaping the behavior, something that B.F. Skinner thought was very important. And shaping is where it's vaguely similar to the behavior that we are looking for. So if, for example, my dog sees a newspaper and isn't interested in it, I would take the food, the pellet, the reinforcer, and place my hand on top of the newspaper. And as soon as my dog interacted with the newspaper, I would reward the dog with a yes and a piece of food. And so we would continue that process with the reinforcer being the food and the yes until the dog was able to pick up the newspaper in his mouth. And then, at that point, following the principles of B.F. Skinner's ideas about operant conditioning, continue with the behavior until training the dog that you can go outside, check the mail, and be chill. Melfina hasn't gotten to the point where she can go outside and be chill, but she definitely has been able to pick things up, retrieve them, and bring them back. So she's learning, and we're using the reinforcers to continue that process. So then the last thing to talk about is the opposite of these reinforcers. When we think about reinforcing something, we typically think about a positive reinforcement, like reinforcing the structures of a building to make it stronger. And then there's the negative reinforcers, which B.F. Skinner called aversive stimuli. And that's basically negative reinforcement or punishment. And so what he found was, I have to sneeze. Time to wash my hands. Okay, So back to aversive stimuli. Remember, this is any kind of punishment or negative reinforcer. So let's use the example of the rat. The rat has learned that pressing the button gives him a pellet. Now, what if we were to try to extinguish the behavior and no longer wanted the rat to push the button? Then we could introduce a bad smell or a shock. So whenever the button was pressed, it would produce a small shock that would startle the rat. And then eventually the rat would learn that pressing the button was going to produce negative reinforcement, and the animal quickly learns to extinguish the behavior of pressing on the button. And so then that's when so another example would be when we're stopping an aversive stimulus, where we're removing the punishment and seeing how it increases positive behavior. So in that same example, if we remove the shock and the rat was able to go and press the button again, then the rat would quickly learn, faster than before, that pressing the button is going to give him that reward pellet. And why is that? It's very interesting, B.F. Skinner's analysis of behavior, isn't it? So if you are, let's give another example, nagging at the dishes. Everybody nags about something once in a while. But nagging doesn't necessarily help us, right? So my husband nags at me to do the dishes. I know I've made that joke a lot, but it's true. He nags at me to do the dishes, and sometimes that means I will do the dishes. But you know what really, really makes it so that I want to do the dishes? When I do the dishes on my own and he notices. And so that's removing the aversive stimuli, removing the nagging aspect of the dishes. And so that promotes the positive reinforcer, the kind words that my husband has and the positive mood he has when he enters the new environment. And so how can we change our behavior to understand our problems? I want you to think about that and consider this as we continue our discussion about the 5 aspects of our problems. And I want you to think about how we can take what we learned about B.F. Skinner and apply it to our own lives. So let me give you the example of dieting, right? Miss Elizabeth is dieting right now. She's lost 13 pounds. It's great. And what I've done is I've extinguish the snacking behavior, right? By removing the reinforcer and replacing it with a desirable behavior instead. So the desirable behavior that I have instead is drinking a cool glass of water. Anytime I feel like I want a snack, I drink a cool glass of water. And that does feel good and refreshing. I also sometimes will include fresh fruit. I'll take a few blackberries or blueberries and I'll eat those and I'll feel refreshed. Instead of snacking on, say, a bag of potato chips, I remove that reinforcer, those potato chips, from my cabinets and my grocery list. And so I've removed the snacks from the home, and by doing so, extinguish the behavior. And so think about what positive and negative thoughts and things like that you have that reward you or negatively reinforce you. What thoughts that you have that negatively reinforce you? And then notice the positive and negative reinforcers that are in your life. Think about that in between now and our next video, and we'll continue our discussion then. So my name is Elizabeth Keel. Thank you for joining us for our discussion on B.F. Skinner. I hope you have a great day.